We have been looking at John chapter 2. And we've been looking at Jesus at the temple. Jesus is at the temple, and he cleanses the temple in order to separate the sacred from the secular. And yet, we abuse this passage, and it's the abuse of this event that bothers me. You cannot yell at your wife and children for 3 hours, having lost your top, and then say, well, it's righteous anger. Jesus tossed over the tables. There is no anger expressed in this passage at all. So anytime you want to justify you losing it on Jesus cleansing the temple, you are horribly abusing John chapter 2 and Jesus. Let's not abuse Jesus. The emotion in this event is articulated clearly. We don't have to guess. And it's not anger, it's not spite, it's not showmanship. He uses the word zeal. And so this morning we're going to talk about zeal in John chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. The problem is we don't use the word zeal anymore. It's even hard to spell. Zeal. So the modern equivalent of the word zeal would be driven. What drives you? That would be zeal. Or how about enthusiasm? Whatever you're enthusiastic about, that's what you've got zeal for. And then passion. Whatever you are passionate about. Passion is another word for zeal. Passion, enthusiasm, and driven are all more words we use in conversation rather than the old word zeal. So Jesus is demonstrating drivenness, enthusiasm, passion, and zeal when he turns over the tables. So let's keep it in that context. So this morning, what I want to talk about is destructive or godly passion, enthusiasm, drivenness, zeal. But I'm going to use the word passions because it's funner. So let's read John chapter 2, verses 13 through 17 before we launch into this discussion about good and bad passion. John chapter 2, verse 13 through 17 says this. The Passover of the Jews was near. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords, and he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers, and he overturned their tables. And to those who were selling doves, he said to them, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Zeal for your house will consume me. You see, right there's the emotion behind it. Zeal. We're going to talk a lot about passion. So let me give you the sermon in the sentence. Let me boil everything down into one sentence. The sermon in the sentence is this. Enthusiasm and passion are gifts from God. So let's avoid selfish and destructive passions and get busy doing godly zeal. Chapter 2, verse 17, from that Old Testament quote. I wanted to start off with a bad example. What's an example where passion has been self-destructive? I'd like to say that it took me a long time to think of a Bible example, but it didn't. I would like to say it took me a long time to think of a cultural example, but the news is full of them. It didn't take any time at all. When I think of passion gone awry, I think of the Old Testament judge, Samson. Samson from Judges chapter 13 and 16. The Old Testament book of Judges, chapters 13 through 16, has the entire life of Samson. Samson was a special little boy because God came to his parents and said, you are going to have a special child. And for this child's entire life, they're going to be dedicated to God. What a beautiful thing. This child is going to live a lifelong vow of the Nazarite vow. The Nazarite vow. Nazarite and Nazarene sound the same, but are completely different. Nazarene is a location. Jesus is from Nazareth. He's a Nazarene. Nazarite comes from the book of Numbers. And it is a vow that you take for a season of specific, hardcore devotion to God. And so you give up 3 things. You sacrifice 3 things during this time to focus totally on God. You give up anything from the vine. From the vine. No juice, no wine, no grape jelly, nothing. Not even in donuts. You give up anything connected to the vine for a season. For a season, you vow to not touch any corpse, nothing dead. You can't touch anything dead. And for this season of a Nazarite vow, you're not to cut your hair. So that as your hair grows, that's a sign of the amount of time you have been spending in special dedication to God. A Nazarite vow. 3 prohibitions. It was only meant to be for a little while. You know, you would take the winter to do it. Or you would dedicate October to the Nazarite vow. Before Samson was born, God set him aside to do the Nazarite vow his entire life. Nothing from the vine, no corpses, touching nothing dead, and not getting a haircut. No cutting of your hair. This guy was going to be special. He was going to be special because the Philistines, the enemy of the Israelites, were oppressing and abusing the Israelites. And so God had set Samson aside in order to crush the Philistines. They were going to crush the Philistines through Samson. That's why he was raised up. Boy, you would think he would have a glorious life of service to God. And he would be a mighty warrior for the cause against the Philistines. And yet, free will enters in. And Samson doesn't want anything to do with any of it. What do you mean I can't have anything from the vine? What do you mean I can't have any contact with the dead? What do you mean I have to have my hair long? He rebelled against the very notion. Now, he did go to war against the Philistines. He did do that part, but he did it haphazardly. He didn't give it his all. He kind of did it as a weekend deal. I got nothing else going on, so I'm going to do it now. He violated every single one of the Nazarite vows except the last one. He drank so much he was known as a drunkard. So that would be violating the nothing from the wine. One of his greatest battles against the Philistines, he used a very unusual weapon, my friends. He used the jawbone of a donkey. Now, a jawbone of a donkey would be a part of a corpse, right? So the weapon of choice he chooses to use is a very violation of the vow that God had given him before he was born. Using a jawbone, because there was nothing else convenient, I guess. Samson is the Old Testament guy who would fit our words as a partier and a player. Samson was a partier and a player. He went to the Philistines to hang out. He gambled. He spent all of his time with loose people. His parents didn't want him to marry a person outside of Israel, and he conned them into it. He lied to his parents. He was a partier. He was a player. He was a drunk. He was a carouser. He was a gambler. He was supposed to be on the front lines fighting the enemy of Israel, and he spent all of his time on the park strip. People on the park strip knew him by name. Here comes Samson. All right, he's got some coin on him. Samson took God-given passions, enthusiasm, drivenness, and he used it for selfish, fleshly reasons and completely missed his divine purpose, his divine calling. That scares me to no end. I'm terrified of that idea. You know the story. He left his hair long, and he was a man of great strength. He ripped off giant doors and carried them down the hill and off away. And these aren't just our little shallow, hollow wooden doors on the interior. These are big, whopping, major doors that he just put on his back and took them away. He was a man of great strength. He was a brave man when he chose to be brave. He was courageous. He was a warrior when he decided he had the time to do it. The Philistines were worried about Samson, so they come up with a plan. They're going to entrap him. And so the way to entrap a man who is addicted to his own passions that are leading to self-destruction is by a woman, of course. And so like a soap opera on TV, Delilah enters the picture. Delilah is from the Valley of Sorek. The Valley of Sorek. Sorek. Isn't that Spock's father? Does that mean Delilah is a Vulcan? Sorry, I sci-fi nerded out there for a minute. It'll be okay. Probably not, because it's not Sorek. It's not. Yeah, it's Sorek. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, right? Woman entraps man. And this will not be the first time in history this happens. And so she's applying her feminine wiles on this man who's obsessed with passion in the wrong way. And he, in fact, lies to her 3 times. Well, how can we get rid of God's given strength to you? Oh, well, if you tie me up with new ropes, I won't be able to break them. So she ties him up with new ropes. The Philistines attack and he breaks them. You would think he would know she was lying, she was the trap. But no, he doesn't see or hear or know anything because he's not thinking straight. So they do it 3 times. Well, if it's a net taken from his hair, if you pluck his hair and you make a net out of it, you can bind him and he can't break it. So she does that. He breaks it. And so finally, in a conversation of guilt and sex, she says, "Why won't you tell me the truth? You obviously don't love me. If you loved me, you would tell me the secret." And so, under a great deal of guilt, lacking any kind of self-control because he's a destructive passion, he tells her that if he gets a haircut, he'll lose his strength. And so she cuts his hair. A good biblical reason not to get a haircut. Judges 16. Samson rejected his divine call and mission, and he chased his own fleshly passions and enthusiasms, even though he knew it was leading to self-destruction. God had to intervene. God had to strip him of his strength. God had to make him a slave. God had to make him so that he was treated like an animal before he finally came to a place of repentance and surrendered to the destiny of God. Finally, he got to a place of self-denial. And then all of a sudden his strength returned. Then he killed more people in his death than he had killed when he was alive. He took out more Philistines at the collapse of the temple than he had done in all the battlefields before. God's purpose got accomplished despite his bad use of the passions. We can be lured astray, my friends, by our own fleshly desires. We can be tempted to serve self instead of serve God. And we may think a little spoonful of sugar will cause you no harm. But before you know it, you have slid down that slope and you are drowning in a vat of it and wondering how you got there. We have received enthusiasm, drivenness, and passion from God, and praise the Lord for it. But we must be aware of the dangers of self-destructive use of that. And Samson's an example of that. We could pull from media all kinds of cultural examples. We love it when a politician who's so full of themselves has a scandal that then they fall down because they're texting pictures they shouldn't be texting. Or a sports athlete who gets caught in some kind of horrible scandal following his own fleshly desires, and he loses his wife and his children and his character and his name. All those endorsements. We could name name after name after name of some Hollywood actor or actress, some pop singer who had a little too much, went off the deep end, created a huge scene, and regardless of anything they have ever done in their entire life, that will be what they will be remembered for. Lord in heaven, in your holiness, guard and protect us from such falls. Stop playing with self-destructive passions. They will burn you like lava. And you know it will happen. You're not the exception, my friends. You're just following the lemons right off the cliff and then wondering why you can't fly. Samson is the bad example. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's go back to the sermon on the sentence.